There we go. So yeah, okay. Hello everyone. Thank you very much for attending. So this is going to be keyless authentication using Azure Managed Identity. A little bit about myself for the people who don't know me. So solutions architect, development team lead, Microsoft Office Development MVP, member of PMP, work on the Office 365 CLI. Get me on Twitter, get me on GitHub. There's my blog there, and I'm also the beard of the GreyHatBeard podcast. Kev, we had last week, is the Grey. So it's a modern workplace podcast that we do every couple of weeks. We basically sit down on a Saturday morning and talk about the week's news and whatever subjects pop into our heads. So we tend to go on a bit. They should be shorter than they are, but there's lots to talk about. So if you fancy that, have a look on whatever podcast system you use, and I'm sure you'll find us on there. So today, keyless authentication using managed identity. So what I'm going to do with this is kind of going to keep it brief with the slides. I really actually want to show you it in action. So the good news is there's plenty of demos. I've actually got 4 showing how you can use managed identity with different resources in Azure. We'll have a bit of a recap of what we've kind of gone through, and then any questions, feel free to jump in. There's a couple of points where, as I'm going through it, there's plenty of opportunities for us to ask questions or answer them as well. So like I say, I've got plenty of demos. All the demos, all the code is all on GitHub. So you'll be able to see this afterwards. So, if you don't catch something, then don't worry about it, because it's going to be out there for you to look at. So I guess the first thing is, what's the problem that we're actually solving? Okay, so in our daily lives almost now, with working in the cloud, we have to deal with managing credentials. It is a fact. We are creating solutions where there's one system talking to another. We've got usernames, passwords, certificates, secrets, all that kind of stuff, which, these are the keys to our information, the knowledge within our organization. So we should be looking after those. We should be looking after our passwords and not writing them down on pieces of paper and sticking them to our monitors, all those kind of things. But from the solution side, how do we actually manage that? How do you deal with secrets for connecting to things? Do you, keep a copy somewhere in some centralized system? You could use something like Azure Key Vault, which is designed for storing away all of those credentials securely. But then there's a bit of a problem there. You've stored all of your credentials in one central system. How do you manage the credentials to connect to that one system? You've still got that problem of you have some credentials somewhere that are exposed. And if those credentials are exposed, you've got a real problem on your hands, because that you've effectively, if someone compromises those credentials, they can get in, access all of your keys, and kind of could cause damage, data loss, data leakage, which we all know in the modern world. You can't go very long without a story of an organization's had some data leaked, and they're obviously in trouble. So the solution to this is something called Azure Managed Identity, which allows you to authenticate to any Azure AD backed service without passing any credentials, which is great because it's Azure AD backed. It's not just one particular service, it's anything that uses Azure AD authentication. So that's a lot of services that you can, connect to. The good news is it's absolutely free, so there's no cost either. So these are one of the things that from a security point of view, security costs a lot. And this is one way that you can really increase your security going forward, that from a development standpoint, which is not actually going to cost you that much money, which I think is really, really good that this is available. So I'm going to jump straight into the very first demo, and this is going to be that scenario of you have a key vault which has a key inside it, and I have a virtual machine running in Azure. How does that virtual machine connect to the key vault to get a secret without having any credentials? So if I just jump across to here, just so I wasn't lying, this is the GitHub repository where all the code is, and it's broken down into the 3 resources and the demos that we're going to go through. So the first one is going to be the virtual machine. So I've actually got this on my machine. I'll just quickly go in and show you what's actually happening here. So to set this kind of demo up, I've got this as a script. So this uses the Azure CLI to create a resource group. We create a virtual machine. We open up the port. We create a key vault, create a randomized string for the secret. We create a secret called super secret within the key vault. And then we just get some basically some information out of what we're going to use to connect to this VM. So what I'm going to do is come into my PowerShell window. So I've set this Azure VM up so that I can SSH remote into it. So I'm not going to use a remote desktop, and I can do this by just using the SSH key. And just so that we know, if I do who am I am Azure user within inside the VM. So at this moment in time, I'm in a VM in Azure, and I need to contact a key vault. And just so it's a bit easier to see, let's go into here. So here we have our VM with all its associated drives and everything there, and we have our key vault here as well. And just so we can see that, we've got a secret and we've got our super secret in there. So first of all, what we need to do, and I'm just going to go to our script. So first thing I want to do is I want to enable managed identity. And flip to there. So you will see on most of the Azure resources that support Azure Managed Identity, there'll be an identity section under settings. Key Vault is slightly different. It's called access policies instead. But essentially what we want to do is, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. I've skipped a bit, skip back. So I've got my virtual machine, and here is the identity section of my Azure VM. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to enable an identity for this virtual machine that this virtual machine is going to use to ask Azure for a token to access the key vault. So I can just come into here and I can flick on and just hit save and just agree. So this is creating a system assigned managed identity. There are other types, user assigned. I'm not going to go into user assigned as much at the moment because it's got different use cases. But for the system assigned identity, think of it as kind of like an application only kind of scenario. I'm not generating tokens with the identity of a particular user. It's as the app, as the machine. So I've just gone and turned that on. And what that has actually done in Azure AD is it's actually created an identity for us. And I can show you that by going into Azure Active Directory, and I go to Enterprise Applications. And I can put in the name of the VM keyless auth dev. So it's created this principle, which is effectively the identity of that VM that then we can assign to other resources and say, can you give this identity access to some of your services? So if I come into here, you can see that it's been named exactly the same as the resource that it's come from, so the Azure VM. And what's nice about this is it's a one-to-one relationship. So nothing apart from the VM itself can use this identity. So there's with it being a one-to-one relationship, the life cycles are matched. So if I went and deleted that VM, this identity would also disappear as well. So it's nice that you don't have things hanging around when you're cleaning things up. But also from a security point of view, it's good to know that other things can't use this, and it's pretty secured. So I'm just going to go back to my resource group into here. So I've enabled my identity for the virtual machine. I now need to tell Key Vault that I want you to be able to accept this identity to access a secret. So I kind of jumped the gun a bit earlier. So I'm coming into access policies, and this is where we are going to create a new access policy and say, I want to be able to give the principal, which is what was created. So if I come into here and do a search, that is our identity of our virtual machine. I'm going to select this, and effectively this is going to say is, you're going to allow this identity to use the get operation to pull back secrets. So I'm going to add that in. There we go. So we've got application level because it's an app system assigned identity. And what we can do now is we can go to Azure and say, right, I want a token for this Key Vault now. So one of the ways that we can do this, I'll go back to my script, is because we are running in a Linux VM, and apologies for this, I've been doing lots of Linux. If you're not too up on it recently, I used it for some learning. But effectively what we're doing is we are sending a HTTP request to a local endpoint inside Azure. So it's not going external or anything. It's a local endpoint that we can say, we want to use our identity to generate a token for the Key Vault. And if I run that,
Garry, just save your policy. You just need to save your Key Vault access policy.
Oh, good spot. Thank you very much, guys. Like extreme session running. Missed off a. So if I look at my token, there we are. So this is an access token. Just to show you exactly what it is for JWT. J. So I can put my token into here, and we can see that here is the key, the actual VM as part of the identity, and this is the audience that we're actually generated this token from, which is the Key Vault. So it can only be used against that Key Vault. So what we can do now is we can take this line. We can use that that access token to call the API for the Key Vault. So what this is doing is it's got the URL of our Key Vault that's been created. It's accessing the super secret. and it's passing our access token. And what that's going to do is return a response with the value in there. Return that. I'll just echo that out. We can see that that is the secret that has been pulled back from Key Vault, and just so we can see that it is actually correct, go to current version, you can actually show the value in there, which is, there we go. So what we've done is actually managed to securely connect through with the VM, accessing a local endpoint, getting a token for a key vault, and then giving that back to us without us having to actually give it any client IDs, any client secrets or anything. So if you are, say, running a scheduled task on an Azure VM and you're connecting to a third-party service, you know, the credentials that you want to pass, you don't want them stored on the VM. If you can put them in Key Vault, at least you don't have to store any credentials to access that Key Vault. I think it's a really nice way of being able to secure away those credentials. So let's skip back to the presentation. So this is actually a diagram of what actually happened. So we have step one. We enabled the managed identity on the virtual machine, which in turn created a new principal in Azure AD. It also updated this Azure Instance Metadata Service, which is the local service which we called to generate a token. The fourth step there, that we gave that identity access to Key Vault through that access policy, and that's using the role-based access control. So we request the token from the local endpoint, which then requests that from AD on our behalf, and then we can then call the protected Azure AD service, in this case Key Vault, and we're able to return the values that we need. So this is basically the process that happens. There's some slight variations in the different services, which I'm going to show going on, but in the main, this is what's going on behind the scenes. And what's good is, Azure is managing all of that complexity for you. What's actually happened is when that Azure AD, the service principles created in Azure AD, what Azure has done, it's actually created a certificate and stored that away in Azure AD for you. So with certificates, they expire. This way, you don't have to worry about that expiring, because it's the managed identity. Azure will handle that expiry and generate a new certificate for you, which is great because it's one less thing you have to worry about, one less reminder you have to put in the calendar of, oop, I need to update the certificate, or the credentials are going to expire and we need to refresh them all. So you get a big benefit there. So just to recap, so we manually enabled that managed identity. We created the access policy in Key Vault, made that HTTP request, passing the target audience, which was Key Vault, and then we use that token to then call the Azure Key Vault API and return that secret value. So the next demo is kind of using a similar approach, but using a logic app. And I absolutely love this demo because it's so simple. It's great. I guess, is there any questions at this point from what's shown at the moment? Oh. There's a no, so we can carry on. So what I'm just going to do is, wrong window, through to the logic app. So the second scenario is the logic app. So what we're going to do here is, this script is just running at the moment. It's probably already finished. It's still going. This is going to basically create this just logic app on its own. So the first time that I created the VM, I did that by script by Azure CLI. This is the same, but it's also using a ARM template to create the logic app. One thing to pull out here, though, is I'm not going to manually go into the portal and update this. I'm actually going to just say, nope, I want to use a system assigned identity, and that's part of the deployment. So it's one less step that I have to do, which is great. So everything can be scripted in the cloud. So that has already happened for us. So there we go. So that has completed. I'm just going to nip back to the source group, and we should see that our logic app has been created. And just to confirm that, if I go to identity, so we can see it's been enabled. So that service principal has now been created in Azure AD for us. So I'm just going to go and look at that principal and point out something which we skipped over before. So here we have our logic app principal. So in here, there's a security section called permissions. Now, if you've been working in Azure AD, you've probably been working in app registrations, and there's kind of a similar approach where you would create an app registration, and you'd go in and say, I want this app registration to have access to different services, whether that be SharePoint, Microsoft Graph. And this is kind of similar. However, because it's a service principal, the Azure portal does not allow you to go in and select the permissions. It's completely read-only. It just shows you what permissions this service principal has access to. So we have to find a different way to basically give this identity access to other services. In kind of like the first slides, I mentioned that managed identity will work against any Azure AD backed service. So that also includes services like the Microsoft Graph and SharePoint Online. They're all covered by Azure AD authentication. So what we can actually do in this scenario is we can actually give this identity permissions, application level permissions to call, say, the Microsoft Graph. So what we can do is, if I skip back to here, I'll just get the code. So we've actually simplified this. There is a way of being able to do this with various scripts in Azure CLI and PowerShell, but we've been using managed identity in the Office 365 CLI and thought, why don't we make a command that makes it really easy? So that's what we're going to use to grant our identity here, the group.read.all scope to the Microsoft Graph. So if I run this, just take a second. There we go. So we've got a response, and that said that that is fine. I can come back into here and I can refresh, and I can see, yep, great. This now has an application level permission. And I can see in here that it's granted by an administrator, and what it actually does. So it's a nice, easy way, if you're using managed identity, to go and look at, okay, well, what access does this identity have? And this is a nice way of seeing it in all one place. So what we'll do is we'll actually go back into our Logic app, and we'll use this identity now to call the resource group. To call Microsoft Graph. So into the Logic app. So it's completely empty. So I'll just set a recurrence trigger at the moment, and we'll use the HTTP action. So I'm just going to do a very simple graph.microsoft the group's endpoint. I'll just put an accept header in there, application JSON, and then the key bit in here is this. So we have a parameter that we can add to the HTTP action. So click the authentication checkbox, and this is a really weird quirk of the UI. Click off the box so that it expands it. I don't know why they haven't just put a proper button in there just to say, yeah, okay, you've selected it. So in here you can choose the authentication type, and we can choose managed identity. And it's picked out system identity. And like what we did in the previous demo, where we used the key vault as the audience, this time we're just going to use the graph instead. So graph.microsoft.com. Just check on my typing. Yep, I think that's right. Okay, I'm going to save that and then just trigger it and hit run. And there we go. It's succeeded. It's gone to that endpoint. Here it said for the authentication, it's using the service managed identity. And here are all the groups that are in my tenant. Very, very easy to do. I love this as an example because it's almost like it's Power Platform. If you use Power Automate, then you'll be used to you'll be able to use Logic apps. But I see this as a huge big benefit over using, say, Power Automate for enterprise level integrations. Because Power Automate doesn't support things like managed identity, you have the scenario of you're using service accounts, and service accounts generally don't have MFA turned on them because they're used by many people, which means they're less secure, and they tend to get given higher level permissions as well because they are a service account. So it leads you down a pretty, well, not so great security journey. And for things where you're working in your team and using your own identity, that's fine because you're generally backed by MFA anyway. You've only got access to what you've got access to, unless you're doing things as a global administrator, but that's slightly different. But this way really just takes away, some of those security concerns because the identity, it's there's no keys or anything. It's all held within Azure, and it's very quick and easy to do. And I really like Logic apps by the fact that you can just do HTTP calls. So if you're building things against the graph, building things against SharePoint Online, you can use this same approach to really just simplify that story. You've not got the how do I get a token from Azure AD, have extra steps in there. Your authentication is just done within the step when it's doing the call. Okay, back to the slides. So, yep, just to recap that. So this time we used an ARM template to enable that managed identity through the script. The Azure portal doesn't support adding those permissions, so using the Office 365 CLI makes it really easy to just add that permission in through that one command. The HTTP action there supports managed identity, so you can call whatever you like as long as you've got permissions to it. And it's really easy just passing that that Azure resource we used the Microsoft Graph resource for the audience, or we could use SharePoint Online as well if we wanted to do that. So into the third demo. Any questions whilst I'm getting this third one just set up? Okay.
I must admit, I just like the fact as well, the logic apps, that it's so easy to, that application lifecycle management piece is just so much better than Power Platform.
Oh,
that's the bit for me.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I've scripted all of these demos, and it's been great getting into Azure CLI and ARM templates just to be able to repeat this process over and over again. So, before I've done this, I've actually rebuilt all of this probably about 4 or 5 times, just by script. So now I've said that, something will go wrong, but it is great to have that life cycle there, because we'll come on to it later, that you're not generally just working in one environment. You're generally working with multiple environments. How do you move things from one environment to another? Power Platform's still a bit immature in that sense. I'm just going to hit the deploy button on this one. But yeah, I mean, I'm just going to leave this one running. If we just go back to what that script is doing for the logic app, I mean, it's what, 37 lines. Yeah, we can add in extra actions and things, but to get something there, we're talking 3 lines of code, if that, that is just repeatable, which is great. And the fact is as well, it's one less thing. I could now just change these variables and deploy it to another environment, and it will work. Again, because of the managed identity, I'm taking away that extra stuff that I would have had to have done. Of I've got to actually create an app registration and give that permissions. In this next kind of demo, which is currently running. So this is actually kind of going a bit further in that it's actually building an Azure function as I'm kind of talking, and it's assigning a managed identity through the Azure CLI. So this is a third way of being able to do this. There is a bit of a bit of a sticking point in that you can't actually deploy a logic app through Azure CLI. You have to use an ARM template because there's no commands in it, which is in the Azure CLI for logic apps, which is a little bit weird. But if I come into here, just this one line here just creates that identity for me. So again, doing things through the portal is great. Click on that. But having the ability to use different tools, different scenarios to get the same outcome, it's dead flexible. So whichever way you want to whatever technologies you use, generally you can find a way. So this has kind of gone through and it's built everything, and it's actually building out an Azure function as well. So it's actually going to do a deployment for us. So there's going to be a live Azure function using managed identity to basically do the same demo as what I did before. So we see here, I've now scripted the app role assignment, which I did manually in the last one, just to give it the same permissions. So I think that's just nearly finished. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through the Azure function, which is in here. So it's a really basic Azure function. It's following the same pattern as what we did before. We're going to, when this is running in Azure, it's going to go to the local endpoint, generate a token for us, give us that token back, and then we're going to use that to call Microsoft Graph. And I'm just using a HTTP client at the moment. the point to really kind of things to point out is I've kind of put this in an auth class here, just get provider, and we're using something called the Azure Service Token Provider, which comes from a package from Microsoft, which basically handles and simplifies all of the calling of the local services for us. So it's all wrapped up in this package where all we need to really care about is I need to create a provider and I need to get a token passing a resource, like what we did before, and same as the the logic app. So that is effectively the audience. So what this is doing internally is it's actually just kind of looking out for some environment variables when it's running in Azure. It goes, okay, there's an environment variable there that says that, yes, I'm running in Azure. I'm going to connect and I'm going to pull everything. I'm going to call that local endpoint for a token. So again, everything's just hidden away. We don't know anything. We don't know what that endpoint is. And quite frankly, do we really care? I'd probably say, no, we don't. Whatever's happening inside Azure, that's fine for Microsoft to know. So if I go back into Azure and come into this one, so we've deployed an Azure function, and I've also put application insights in there as well, so we can see the requests coming through. Let's just double check that the permissions have been added in Azure AD. Back into enterprise applications. And here is our function. Look at permissions. Yep, so that's all set up, the same as the other one that that I created in the last demo. So this is all ready to go now. So let's go to the function and let's test it. So function, go to the group, do a test, and test and run. Do a get request, hit run, and hey, there we go. Same as what the logic app was. It's gone through and it's just pulled back simply just all the groups that are in this tenant. Now, if I go to App Insights, let's just show you a little bit more what's happening. I can use the application map, which should pick it up. There's no data yet. I think it's still waiting to come through. Have I been too quick for it?
It takes about 5 minutes, doesn't it, sometimes?
Yeah, we'll come back to that because it'd be good to see. It's a nice visualization of what's actually happening. So, that has been quite quick to do. It's very basic. Been able to script and create this Azure function with everything it needs, permissions wise, to call the graph. But we have a bit of a problem. At the moment, we're kind of coding blind. It's almost like going back to the old SharePoint days. You'd write a load of code, you'd save it, you'd deploy it into SharePoint, see if it works, rinse and repeat, because the authentication is happening in Azure on our own machines. Obviously, we're not in Azure. So how do you get that that experience working locally? So the way that we can do this is the provider here, this Azure Service Token Provider, does a series of checks. So when it's running in the first check, when it's running in Azure, it says, do I have any environment variables that let me know that I'm running in Azure? Yes, okay, I've got the values to understand where an endpoint is that I can make a request to get a token. If that doesn't exist, it then goes to the next level. The next level is, am I running in Visual Studio? Which is quite nice. So if you ran this locally, it would take the identity of your account logged in here. Now, that's all well and good if you're running as a user, but we're not running a user, we're running as an app. So it goes to the third level and says, do you have the Azure CLI running on your machine? If you do, I'm going to use the Azure CLI to actually make a connection as a certificate and basically create a certificate-based authentication from your local machine. So that's what we have to do really to mimic what is happening in Azure. We have to generate a certificate, have that on our machine that then the Azure CLI can use, so that then you're getting the same level of authentication. You can debug in the same way as if it's running in Azure. So there is there is a fourth demo. So if I come back to here, we have this create the service principal and self-signed certificate. So this works for Windows, is what I'm going to show you. There is a different way for doing it on a Mac. It's the same process. It's just the way Windows does certificates and the way that Macs do certificates are just two completely different ways. They just don't play nice to each other. So to make this easier, I've actually put this into a script. So we're going to create a new self-signed certificate, and we're going to call this keyless auth local dev. What that's going to do is going to create that certificate, but add that directly into our machine, into our personal certificate store. And then it's going to create a new Azure AD principal using that certificate. So that's actually going to go into Azure using our local certificate. And then we're going to pull some information back that we can then use to tell Azure CLI when it's running locally, use these values which you need to then use to connect. So if I'm just going to check that I'm actually connected. Is it connected? That account. Yep, I knew it won't do that. Nope, can't type now. Password manager. Where's that window gone? There we go. So connect to that, so it's in the right subscription, and I think I called it local cert. So let's run that. Oh, I've already created it. This is my problem when I was doing the demos earlier. So I'll actually show you what it had actually done. So I can fix this quite easily. All it's complaining about is we've got this. Oh. Oh dear. I just check the
It'll be the, is it the URL that you're using?
yeah,
the app ID URL by the looks of it.
Yeah, it doesn't like that for some reason. Knew the demo gods would have got me at some point. It's too too
What
good
does the
to.
what does the end of your SP line say? What's the end of that line 3 say? Is it just start date? Is that the last?
Oh yeah, so it's there we go.
Oh right, okay.
So it's just doing the dates and then getting the values. So what I can do is do the really hacky way.
Yes. Okay.
Just put 1 at the end, and then that'll be different. So let's run that. Yeah, there we go. So that one's created it. So so I can take these values, the app ID, and jump into my local settings. So these are obviously they're not put into source control or anything like that. I can just go back tenant ID and the thumbprint. So that is saved there. And what I can do is then give this permissions. So what did I call it? I called it the name of the principal that's been created for us. There we are. So that has now got permissions in Azure so that we can actually connect through. And just so show you where the certificate is. Oops. Did I tell you I'd moved back from being on a Mac for a while? Does it show? There we go. So there's our local certificate that's in there that we've created via the script. So back into here, and I put a breakpoint in. So now I can run this locally. Let's call this. Request in, and we should hit our breakpoint. So F10, let's go into here. So there we can see our access token has been returned, and then that can go through and return our values to here. There we go. So it's just like running in Azure, but we're actually doing this locally now. So this is great then for using managed identity for development. There is one thing though that I would definitely strongly recommend is don't do this against your production tenant. If you're doing this, it should be against another tenant just because of the rights that this has. It's got application level permissions against the tenant, which means, you know, if you give that right permissions, you can do a hell of a lot of damage, which you don't want to do when you're developing. So definitely use this against another tenant as well. Stop that. So there is one thing is that this is using a .NET Core Azure function. So this is version 3. So this is the latest version. Because we've got the access token now, we can use this. Well, I'm just using a HTTP client. I could have also passed this token to the Microsoft Graph client as well. Used that and kind of got better kind of an SDK for using Microsoft Graph, but now that they've released the CSOM, for SharePoint, which is now using .NET Core. You could actually use this approach using the new CSOM, because that also accepts an access token as well for gaining the SharePoint context. So you can use it in a variety of ways now to just generate that token and pass that on to whatever tool you're using to make the requests. So, yep, we went through, it's this separate principle that we're creating for the local development and debugging, using those two PowerShell commandlets to create the certificate and then create a new principle in Azure AD. We store those 3 values in our local settings. Don't put that in source control or anything. That's just for us to use locally. And then that Azure service token provider, it uses Azure CLI as that replacement for the IMDS that the Azure Resources are going to be using when running in Azure to get tokens. So those are the 4 demos. So have a bit of a recap of just what managed identity is there. So we've kind of seen that we don't need credentials in code. In some cases, we don't even need them in Key Vault either, because we don't have to worry about those kind of things anymore. We're letting Azure deal with that. It really simplifies the app-only scenarios where you need to connect to SharePoint and to the graph and any other services out there. We can let Azure handle the credentials. We don't have to worry about expiry. We don't have to worry about lifecycle. We've just deferred that to Microsoft to handle. It really simplifies your continuous integration and continuous deployment scenarios. Like shown, you can use ARM templates, you can use Azure CLI as well. Not having to handle the credentials between different environments, between test and dev and test and then production as well. That's one less headache you have to worry about. You can use the app authentication package for local development. And there is no extra cost at all. So, it's not like we're kind of constrained by licensing here. There's really no reason not to be using this because of, that there is no cost in that. I guess the only one downside of using managed identity, and it might not be a downside, I'm kind of looking at it as probably a good thing, is to actually enable a resource to have user managed identity. So going into the portal, clicking the enable button and hitting save. The permissions that you need to do that are just at the subscription level. So you need less permissions to be able to do that. However, to give that identity that's created permissions to, say, SharePoint or Graph in the scenario that we used, that requires global admin to do that, because you're making a change at the Azure Active Directory level. And I've looked into this a couple of times to try and see if there is a role that allows you to, not have all of that power in that role to just give those permissions. And unfortunately, there isn't. Now, I say it's a good thing because it means that we have to be a bit more open. We have to tell admins, okay, this is what's happening. These are the permissions that we need, and we can have those discussions with the administrators. From a development point of view, we always like to just get on there sometimes and do a quick job, but this actually means that we can't. We have to give over that responsibility to the global admin and make sure that they're happy with what we're doing. And to the point as well, once we've done things in development, we shouldn't be touching test and we shouldn't be touching production anyway. So once that is in place, you don't have to keep doing it. So it's a one-time action, which is good. Once that principle's got that permission, it's not going to disappear until someone actually goes in and removes that. So plenty of resources that are out there. Obviously, all the code and the scripts that I've used are all on GitHub. Here are the few kind of resources that I used, which are really helpful. And I guess thinking of your next project. If you're not using managed identity at the moment, are there scenarios that you're thinking, yeah, definitely I'm going to use this next? Are there anything that you've done in the past which you think, actually that whole solution that has been built could really be simplified by taking this approach? So maybe next time you're writing an Azure function or you're doing a logic app, think of managed identity to help you streamline that authentication and bring your security level up as well. So that is the end of the session. So I guess thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've know a hell of a lot more about managed identity now and how we can use it. I guess any questions, then yeah, be happy to answer them.
Something from Dylan.
Dylan's got the hand up. The hand works.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for that. It was an interesting session. If I see your medals behind you as well, sorry, I've got distracted now. If there was one thing that you wanted to say to sell it to somebody in terms of an idea, what would you say? You can now do this and you couldn't do that before. You know what I mean? To compress it all down to a single sentence that will get somebody's attention thinking, wow, we must do this now. If you're trying to sell it to a manager, for example, or somebody else, and just say why we should be doing this.
I think it comes back to having the discussion about security.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is it. We are living in a world now where security should be one of the highest things that we're looking at right from the very beginning. When we're building solutions, we should think building security. Writing things now that just use a username and password it's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, negligence.
It is. It's a responsibility almost that you have to say, are we managing our credentials in the way that you would expect? So, I use a password manager for my own, accounts. I've got hundreds of accounts out there. Okay, so I've taken a personal responsibility to go out and use a password manager to make sure that my information is secure and that I'm not using the same passwords. I don't even know what my passwords are because they're complex and I use MFA and all those kinds of things. But passwords are weak. They are weak. There's billions of passwords on like the blacklists, if you like, of compromised passwords, and it happens all the time. There's always another breach of this company's not been storing things in they've been storing it in clear text and it's out there and everyone's going to change the passwords. So it's just you start at the password level and go, is that appropriate? Probably not. Okay, how do we harden that? We'll put MFA on there. Okay, great. You've put MFA on, but these are on accounts. That's interactive now. That's where the security comes from, which is just a nightmare.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a nightmare. It's impossible for doing automation scenarios. So then you're getting into client IDs and client secrets and generating those. You're then generating certificates. And as your security, I guess, needs, or the more security you want, the more complex it gets. And I think that what this is doing is it's taking all of those good bits, the certificate level security, and wrapping it up into one feature that you can just enable and then utilize. And I think that would probably be the best place to start in terms of having that conversation, because I think as organizations, definitely, I mean, a lot of us are consultants. I work with lots of clients who have, they have great practices, some don't have great practices. And it's still on you as an individual to make sure that you're dealing with other people's information as best you can, really, and making sure that all that is protected.
You've also got less management over it, haven't you? I mean, how many times have, has a service failed because a certificate has expired, or or a client secret has expired, and you don't have to kind of don't have to worry about that issue as well. I guess that's another thing. So yeah.
I like the way that you can increase security without increasing complexity. So in other words, you can vastly improve your security without adding days onto a project and thus cost. So that would be very much how I would attempt to persuade people to go about that way.
Yeah, and there's also you could actually speed things up. You've potentially taken a chunk of extra things that you would have to manage or add in or code in, to now say, actually I can use one package in the C# perspective and just have a couple of lines of code. That's my authentication done. I'm spending the rest of my time working on the business logic. I'm not scaffolding, and that will, well, you'll end up spending more time on the solution, which is always good, rather than the bits that we should do over and over again. Yeah, I think it's good in terms of managed identity is becoming a bit more popular now, from what I've seen. So there's more and more services that are utilizing managed identity. So the Azure Cloud Shell uses managed identity. So when you log into Azure, for example, and it just magically, you're in there. That's how Cloud Shell works. And the Office 365 CLI, we've added that in there as well for managed identity. So if you are in the scenario of, the first example, you're running a VM in Azure, and you want to connect to Office 365 without using your credentials, you can use the CLI to do that. Simplification is always a good thing. Less code means there's less complexity and less problems to deal with, which actually is why I love the Logic App example. It's so simple yet really effective, and it would, it's definitely my go-to for doing things now in Office 365. There's a little bit of an extra cost in there, but the Azure functions are great, but you've still got to actually code them. And I'd rather have as little code as possible and use the Azure functions for things that the Logic apps just cannot do, or they can. You just have about 20 actions to do what a single line in an Azure function can do. So you get to mix and match. So that was that's sort of a real powerful tool.
Thank you for that.
It's okay.
Have you tried doing can you authenticate against SQL with a managed identity?
Yes. So like I said, it's any Azure AD service. So SQL is backed by Azure AD. So one of the things that you can do, and I suppose I could kind of show you, if I share my screen again, I can go into the portal. Share tray. I get the right window. Probably opened a new one. Yeah. So if I go to something like this one, this access control tab here, you've probably seen this on nearly every a kind of resource in Azure. You can come into here and you can do the role assignment, and because you've got a service principal, you can select it in here, so you can have your system assigned ones. So you can just say, I want you to have this particular role. Oh. That was interesting. That was experiencing authentication issues. Interesting. Yeah, so I've got these against this key vault. If I go back into it, you've got a whole host of different options. So here are all the different roles that you could give that service principal. So if you're in SQL, there's different database level roles that are in there. I've just used this for Azure Cosmos DB as well. So rather than using a connection string, it uses managed identity to basically I give that the I think it's a contributor role for the Cosmos DB, and that just gives it read write, and that's
great,
it.
Yeah.
So it's the same, as long as everything's got an API now. So Cosmos DB has an API around it that you call to, create containers and all those kind of things. Same with SQL, same with, say, a storage account is another. Storage accounts generally using things like shared access, shared access signatures or primary keys. This way, you're just passing the storage, I guess, endpoint. I think it's management.azure.com. I think it is the audience, and you're just saying, I want you to give me a token for this resource, and then you can use that to then call the storage account API. If you take a look at the on here. So if I go into this one, if it opens, there is all these that support it. And there's many more, in fact. So we looked at functions, logic apps, VMs, but yeah, storage as well.
Cool. Thank you.
That's right. Right. So.
Well, thank you very much, Garry. My son is telling me that it's time to put him to bed as well.
Yeah, I have a half-eaten pizza downstairs that is calling me as well.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Garry, for doing that. It was really interesting. It's good. It's I think it's a great thing to pick up and totally agree with you that they are the way to go, and logic apps as well is the way to go too. So yeah, so that's good. I'm going to put my kids to bed now because yeah. and thank you very much. We've got another session on the 21st, haven't we? I just wanted to bring that up before I shoot off. But thanks very much, Garry, for putting all this together and taking the time to do that. So it was a really good session.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Garry.
I'll circulate the links to the GitHub and the presentation as well afterwards. So if you do want to pick that up, that'll be there. And if any questions that you want to ask, then you know where to get me. Feel free to ask away. I'll be happy to help.
Thanks, Garry.
Thank you very much, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Garry. See you later.
Cheers, Tony.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. I'm going to have to head out as well now.
Yeah.
See you later. Thanks very much.
See you in a couple of weeks, everyone.
Same time, same place, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
All
Cheers,
right.
all. Bye.
See ya. Bye.